After 20 years of excluding me from family reunions, they had the nerve to show up at my mansion. I opened the door, spoke calmly, and watched the color drain from their faces. Before we continue, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. Now let me tell you my story. My world is one of quiet, orderly infinities. It resides in the silent, cosmic dance of distant galaxies, in the elegant, unyielding logic of physics, and within the clean, minimalist lines of the home I built for myself, a sanctuary nestled high in the hills overlooking the city. My name is Dr. Rosalind Hayes, and for the better part of my 65 years I have been a student of the universe. My life is measured in light years and gravitational waves, not in stock prices or social calendars. The mansion, as the tabloids would later call it, is not a symbol of wealth, but a tool for my work. The south wing is a state-of-the-art private observatory, its domed roof sliding back with a near-silent hum to reveal the vast star-dusted canvas of the night sky. The library does not hold first editions of novels, but thousands of academic journals and original manuscripts from the pioneers of astrophysics. It is a quiet, peaceful, and profoundly fulfilling existence, one I carefully constructed after a painful and decisive break from the world I was born into. 20 years ago I was Rosalind Monroe, the brilliant but inconvenient daughter of the powerful Monroe family. Our name was synonymous with Monroe Manufacturing, an industrial behemoth built by my grandfather, a company that had made its fortune on the brute force of 20th century industry. My older brother, Clarence, was the heir, a man who shared my father's ruthlessness but none of his vision. My younger sister, Simone, was the socialite, a woman whose ambition was measured in the carat of her diamonds and the prestige of her social connections. I, with my passion for the abstract, beautiful world of science, was the anomaly, the disappointment. The final schism came when my father passed, and his will dictated I take a seat on the board. I refused. I would not dedicate my life to a company that I saw as a relic, a dinosaur poisoning the planet in the name of profit. My refusal was not seen as a choice of passion but as an act of war, a betrayal of the family legacy. Clarence, newly minted as CEO, made the excommunication official. I was formally disowned, my name struck from the family trust, cast out with only a small, almost insulting inheritance from my grandmother, a woman who had secretly shared my love for the stars. That small inheritance became my seed of quiet rebellion. I disappeared from their world, immersing myself in academia, earning my doctorate, and building a reputation as one of the leading minds in my field. But I did something else in secret. With the cold, analytical mind of a scientist, I began to invest my grandmother's legacy. I wasn't interested in the stock market. I was interested in the future. I became a silent, anonymous venture philanthropist, seeking out small, brilliant startups in the nascent field of green technology. My first and greatest success was a small, struggling solar panel company called Helios Innovations, run by a brilliant, fiercely determined young engineer named Mia Phillips. I saw the genius in her work, the elegant, world-changing potential. I funded her when no one else would. Over 2 decades I used my growing fortune to anonymously seed dozens of similar ventures, creating a silent, invisible empire built not on exploitation but on innovation. Helios Innovations, with Nia at the helm and my guidance from the shadows, grew into a global titan, the very force that was now making companies like Monroe Manufacturing obsolete. My family, I knew from the distant, disdainful reports in the financial news, was struck, but they were a ghost from a past life, a problem I had solved by walking away, or so I thought. The breach came on a Tuesday afternoon. The day was clear and quiet, the kind of day I cherished for its uninterrupted potential for work. I was in my study, reviewing spectral analysis data from the Keck Observatory, when my head of security, a calm and capable man named Arthur, buzzed me on the intercom. His voice was as serene as ever, but I detected an undercurrent of tension. "Dr. Hayes," he said, "you have some visitors at the front gate. They do not have an appointment." I frowned. Unannounced visitors were a rarity. My home was protected by a long winding road, and a formidable security gate. "Who is it, Arthur?" I asked. There was a slight pause. "They say they are your family, ma'am. A Mr. Clarence Monroe, a Mrs. Simone Monroe, and a younger gentleman, a Mr. Jordan Monroe." The name struck me like a physical blow. Monroe, a name I had not spoken, had barely even thought in years. A lifetime of carefully constructed peace and quiet was suddenly threatened by the arrival of the very people from whom I had built this sanctuary to escape. For a moment, I was tempted to simply say, tell them to leave, to deny their existence, just as they had denied mine for 2 decades. But curiosity, the driving force of my entire life, got the better of me. What could possibly have driven them here to my doorstep, after 20 years of absolute, deafening silence? I knew it wasn't a social call. The Monroes did nothing without a clear, self-serving agenda. Let them in, Arthur, I said, my voice calm, betraying none of the sudden turmoil in my heart. Escort them to the grand study. I will meet them there. I took a few moments to compose myself. I looked at my reflection in the dark screen of my monitor. I saw a 65-year-old woman with streaks of gray in her hair, her face lined with the quiet focus of a life spent in study, not in boardrooms. I was not the fiery, emotional young woman they had cast out. I was a scientist, a woman who dealt in facts and evidence, not in drama. I smoothed the front of my simple black dress, a garment of practical elegance, and walked from the quiet data-filled world of my personal study to the grand 2-story library I used for more formal meetings. The room was my one concession to grandeur, a vast, light-filled space with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a rolling ladder, and a large imposing fireplace. It was designed to subtly intimidate, a useful tool in the few business meetings I chose to take in person. As I entered, they were already there, standing awkwardly in the center of the room, looking utterly out of place. They were ghosts, older, more tired versions of the people I remembered, but fundamentally unchanged. Clarence, my older brother, was still a bull of a man, his expensive suit, now looking a little too tight, his face ruddy with a mixture of arrogance and ill-concealed anxiety. Simone, my younger sister, looked frail and desperate, her socialite smile stretched thin across a face filled with fear. And with them was a young man I didn't recognize, a handsome, sharp-featured man in his 20s with his mother's looks and his uncle's arrogant sneer. This had to be Jordan, Simone's son, the heir apparent to their crumbling kingdom. They looked at me, and I could see the shock in their eyes. They had expected, I think, to find a withered, eccentric spinster. They did not expect the calm, poised, and undeniably powerful woman, who now stood before them. The unwanted reunion had begun. The initial moments were a thick, suffocating bog of insincerity. My sister Simone was the first to move, rushing forward with her arms outstretched, her face a carefully constructed mask of tearful, long-lost affection. Rosalind, oh Rosalind, look at you, I can't believe it's really you after all these years. Her embrace was brief and brittle, the hug of a stranger. Her expensive perfume was a cloying, unwelcome scent in the clean, paper-scented air of my library. I did not return the hug. I simply stood, a still, quiet island in the storm of her manufactured emotion, and waited for it to pass. When she pulled back, she dabbed at her perfectly dry eyes with a silk handkerchief. "We've missed you so much," she whispered, her voice cracking with a falseness that was almost insulting. "Not a day has gone by that we haven't thought of you." I looked past her to my brother. Clarence had not moved. He stood by the fireplace, his arms crossed over his chest, his expression a mixture of contempt and impatience. He was here for a purpose, and his sister's pathetic theatrics were clearly trying his patience. The young man, Jordan, stood slightly behind him, his eyes scanning the vast library with a look of undisguised covetous awe. He was not looking at the books, he was assessing the value of the real estate. "Clarence," I said, my voice calm and even, cutting through Simone's performance. "You've come a long way. To what do I owe the honor?" My brother's jaw tightened. He was a man accustomed to being in charge, and my refusal to play along with their family reunion charade had clearly thrown him off balance. But before he could speak, Simone launched into her real appeal. "We were wrong, Rosalind," she said, her voice now a low, pleading whisper. She reached out and took my hand, her own hand surprisingly cold. "We were all just so hurt when you turned your back on the family, on Daddy's legacy, but pride is a terrible thing. It's kept us apart for too long, but things have changed. The world has changed. And we need you. We need to be a family again." It was a masterful performance, I had to admit. She was attempting to rewrite history, to cast me as the one who had turned my back, to frame their excommunication of me as a mutual, prideful misunderstanding. She was offering me a chance to absolve them of their sins, to wipe the slate clean, all in the name of a family I no longer recognized. I gently but firmly pulled my hand from hers. "The family, as I recall, made its position quite clear 20 years ago," I said, my voice still quiet, still calm. "The ties were not strained, Simone. They were severed. By you and by him." I nodded towards Clarence. That was when my brother's patience finally snapped. Fed up with the theatrics, he pushed himself off the mantel and took a step forward, his presence filling the room with a familiar bullying energy. Enough of this nonsense, he growled, his voice the same gravelly impatient baritone I remembered. We're not here to cry over old wounds. We're here because we have a problem, a serious problem. He began to pace in front of the fireplace, his movements agitated, the movements of a caged animal. He told me the story I already knew in broad strokes from the financial news, but he told it from his perspective, as a litany of unfairnesses, a story of a great man brought low by forces beyond his control. He spoke of changing markets, of predatory environmental regulations, of a world that had unfairly turned against the very industries that had built the country. He spoke of Monroe Manufacturing, not as a failing business, but as a victim. Finally, he stopped pacing and looked directly at me, his eyes hard and demanding. The company is on the brink of collapse, he said, the words a blunt, ugly admission. The banks have called in our loans. We are facing bankruptcy. Not just the company, us, personally. We are ruined. Simone began to weep, this time with genuine terrified tears. Jordan looked at his uncle with a new panicked respect. And then Clarence delivered the line that was the true purpose of their visit, the demand that lay beneath all the false tears and hollow apology. We need a bailout, Rosalind, he said, his voice dropping, not with humility, but with the unshakable certainty of a man who believes he is collecting a debt. We need $50 million to stabilize the company, and another 10 to secure the family's personal assets. It is your duty to provide it. You are a Monroe. That money you've been playing with. That seed money from grandmother, that was Monroe money. By right, everything you have built belongs to this family, and we have come to collect. The sheer breathtaking audacity of his demand hung in the air, a monstrous obscene thing in the quiet scholarly sanctuary of my library. He had not come to ask for my help. He had not come to appeal to my sense of familial love or compassion. He had come, after 20 years of complete and total banishment, to inform me of my duty, to levy a tax on a fortune he had no part in creating, a fortune he clearly believed was his by divine right. He was not a supplicant. He was a king, temporarily embarrassed, arriving to claim tribute from a vassal state. He stood there, his chest puffed out, a look of grim righteous expectation on his face. Simone had stopped crying, and was now looking at me with a new hopeful urgency. Jordan, the young lawyer, was watching me with a cold, appraising stare, as if he were already calculating the legal fees. They were a pack of wolves, their teeth bared, convinced they had their prey cornered. I let the silence stretch, letting his words echo in the vast, book-lined space. I did not get angry. I did not shout. My heart, which had been pounding with a mixture of shock and old, familiar pain, settled into a slow, steady and ice-cold rhythm. My scientific mind took over, assessing the situation not as a family drama, but as a hostile takeover attempt, an invasion of my sovereign territory. I looked at each of them in turn, my gaze calm, analytical, and utterly devoid of the emotion they were expecting. I looked at Simone, my sister, a woman so terrified of losing her social standing that she was willing to prostitute her own history for a chance at salvation. I looked at Jordan, my nephew, a young man so steeped in the family's culture of entitlement that he could see no moral or ethical problem with this shakedown. And finally, I looked at Clarence, my brother, a man so blinded by his own pride and arrogance that he genuinely believed he was in the right. When I finally spoke, my voice was not the voice of the emotional young woman they had cast out. It was the voice of Dr. Rosalind Hayes, a woman who had spent 2 decades in the quiet, unyielding company of facts. Let me see if I understand the situation correctly, I began, my voice as calm and precise as a lecturer in a university hall. For 20 years you have treated me as if I were. I have been excluded from every family gathering, every holiday, every wedding, every funeral. My own daughter, your niece, has grown up without knowing any of you, because you made it clear that any association with me was grounds for excommunication from the Monroe clan. I paused, letting the truth of my words settle in the quiet room. Simone had the grace to look away, a flicker of shame in her eyes. Clarence's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. During those 20 years, I continued, you, Clarence, ran our father's company into the ground. You ignored every market trend. You refused to innovate. You treated the world as if it were still 1980. You clung to the past, to a business model that was as outdated and inefficient as your own arrogant pride. And now, having driven the family legacy off a cliff, you have the nerve to appear at my door, not with an apology, not with a request, but with a demand. You demand that I sacrifice my life's work, the fortune I built with my own mind and my own effort, to bail you out of a disaster of your own making. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, my quiet presence suddenly more imposing than my brother's blustering rage. You speak of my duty. You speak of what is yours by right. Let me be perfectly, unequivocally clear. You have no rights here. This family, this house, this life, it is mine, and it is a world you are no longer a part of. You severed all ties. You cannot now reappear and pretend those ties still exist simply because you are desperate. I looked directly into my brother's eyes, and I delivered the final, devastating verdict. The answer is no. I will not give you one single penny. And then I simply stood there in the quiet, sunlit sanctuary of my own creation, and I watched with the detached, analytical curiosity of a scientist observing a chemical reaction, as the color drained from their faces, and their world of arrogant, entitled certainty collapsed into a pile of ash. The immediate aftermath of my refusal was a tableau of stunned, sputtering disbelief. For a moment, no one spoke. They simply stared at me, their minds clearly unable to process a reality in which I was not a compliant, easily intimidated resource to be plundered. They had come to my home with a single, unshakable conviction, that when push came to shove, my sentimental attachment to the idea of family would override any personal feelings, and I would do my duty. They had fundamentally miscalculated. They had assumed I was still the person they had cast out, not the person I had become in the long, quiet years of my exile. Simone was the first to break the silence, her face a crumpled mask of horror. "Rosalind, you can't mean that," she whispered, her voice a reedy, desperate plea. "We are your blood. We are your only family. You would let us be homeless? You would let the company your grandfather built be destroyed? The company your brother destroyed, you mean?" I corrected her, my voice still calm. "And yes, I would. Actions have consequences, Simone. You of all people should understand that. You made a choice 20 years ago, a choice to side with power and money over your own sister. You are now simply living with the consequences of that choice." It was Clarence, however, who recovered first, his shock quickly curdling into a familiar venomous rage. The mask of the beleaguered patriarch fell away, revealing the snarling, entitled bully beneath. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" he spat, his face a mottled, ugly shade of red. "Sitting up here in your ivory tower, looking down on the rest of us. You always thought you were better than us, with your books and your precious science. But you're nothing without the Monroe name. You're nothing without the money our grandmother gave you." "The money your grandmother gave me was a pittance compared to the fortune you inherited and squandered," I replied, my voice as cool and sharp as a shard of glass. "And I have built my life not on the Monroe name, but in spite of it, I have no one to thank for my success but myself." The quiet, irrefutable truth of my statement seemed to enrage him further. He took a menacing step toward me, his fists clenched at his sides. "This isn't over," he snarled, pointing a trembling finger at my face. "That money is ours, and we will get it, one way or another. I will see you in court. I will drag your name through the mud. I will prove that you are nothing but a thief who stole this family's birthright." His threat, which was meant to terrify me, had the opposite effect. It clarified everything. There was no hope of reconciliation, no chance of a peaceful resolution. They had just in no uncertain terms declared war. I simply turned my head and gave a short, sharp nod to my head of security, Arthur, who had been standing silently by the library doors the entire time. "Arthur," I said, my voice calm, "our guests are leaving." Arthur, a man of quiet, imposing competence, stepped forward. "This way, please," he said, his voice polite but with an underlying tone of non-negotiable authority. He gestured toward the door. Jordan, the young lawyer, who had been silent up to this point, gave me a final contemptuous sneer. "You'll be hearing from my office, Aunt Rosalind," he said, the honorific dripping with sarcasm. "You've just made a very powerful enemy." I simply looked at him, a flicker of what might have been pity in my eyes. "No, young man," I said softly, "you have." Arthur escorted them out, their angry, sputtering protests echoing down the long marble hallway before finally being silenced by the heavy front door. I was left alone in the sudden, blessed silence of my library. The invasion was over, but the war had just begun. I felt no fear. I felt no panic. I simply felt a deep, weary and profound sense of resolve. They had come to my sanctuary and threatened to burn it to the ground. They had no idea that they were the ones who were playing with fire. The first salvo in their war arrived exactly 1 week later. It was delivered not by a courier but by a grim-faced process server who was met by my security at the front gate. The lawsuit was a thick, professionally bound document, a testament to my nephew Jordan's newfound and malicious sense of purpose. I read it in my study, not with the panic they had intended to induce, but with the cold, analytical eye of a scientist dissecting a flawed and deeply dishonest thesis. The legal argument was, on its face, absurd. It was a convoluted and desperate attempt to rewrite history, a legal fiction of the highest order. The suit, filed on behalf of the Monroe family estate, claimed that the inheritance I had received from my grandmother had been improperly administered. It alleged that the funds were part of a larger indivisible family trust, and that my use of them for my own private investments constituted a breach of fiduciary duty. The conclusion was as breathtaking in its arrogance as it was lacking in legal merit. It demanded that all of my assets, my entire fortune, the fruits of 20 years of my own brilliance and hard work, be seized and turned over to the Monroe estate, to be managed by its rightful executor, my brother Clarence. It was, in short, a legal declaration that my life's work was not my own. It was a flimsy, transparent attempt to use the courts to achieve the shakedown they had failed to achieve through intimidation. I could see Jordan's fingerprints all over it, the work of a young, immoral lawyer trying to make a name for himself with a high-profile, high-stakes lawsuit. But what was most insulting was not the legal argument, but the personal affidavits attached to it. They were signed by Clarence and Simone, and they were masterpieces of malicious fiction. They painted a portrait of me as a naive, emotionally unstable woman who had been manipulated by my grandmother, a woman they now claimed had been suffering from diminished mental capacity when she wrote her will. They were trying to posthumously declare their own mother incompetent, in order to steal from their sister. The sheer ghoulish cruelty of it was stunning. They were willing to desecrate the memory of their own mother in the name of their greed. I finished reading the document and set it down on my desk. I felt a surge of anger, yes, but it was a cold, clean anger, not a hot, reckless one. They had made their move. Now it was time for me to make mine. I picked up my secure phone and called Nia Phillips. "Nia," I said, my voice calm. "They've done it. They've filed a lawsuit." I could hear a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, followed by a low, angry growl. "Rosalind, you're joking." "I wish I were," I said. "It's as ridiculous as we expected, but it's real. I'm sending you the file now." I emailed her the lawsuit, and for a few minutes there was silence as she read. When she spoke again, her voice was vibrating with a cold, controlled fury. "The unmitigated gall of these people," she hissed. "To attack you, to attack your grandmother's memory. It's monstrous." Nia was more than just the CEO of my most successful company. She was the closest thing I had to a daughter, a protégé I had mentored and protected for 2 decades. An attack on me was an attack on her, and her loyalty was as fierce and unyielding as a force of nature. "What do you want to do?" she asked, her voice shifting into the crisp, decisive tone of the powerful CEO she was. "This is a nuisance suit, but it's a public one. It will require a response." "I want to crush it, Nia," I said, my own voice now matching her intensity. "I don't just want to win, I want to make them regret they ever thought of this. I want to make an example of them." "Good," she said, a note of grim satisfaction in her voice. "Because I have just mobilized the entire corporate legal department of Helios Innovation. I'm putting our top litigator, the shark as we call him, on this personally. We are going to defend you with the full, overwhelming and frankly terrifying resources of this company. We are going to bury them in motions. We are going to bankrupt them with legal fees. We are going to make them wish they had never heard the name Rosalind Hayes." In that moment, a quiet, brilliant astrophysicist and a powerful, ruthless CEO forged an alliance. The Monroe family had picked a fight with a lonely old woman. They had no idea they had just declared war on a global superpower. While the legal machinery of Helios Innovations began to grind into motion, a silent, overwhelming force preparing to descend upon my family's flimsy lawsuit, the Monroes launched the second phase of their attack. Knowing that their legal case was a long shot at best, they opened a new front in their war, the court of public opinion. They were not just trying to win a lawsuit. They were trying to craft a narrative, to paint a public picture of me so pathetic and unstable that their eventual move to seize my assets would look not like an act of greed, but like a tragic necessary intervention. The first article appeared in a notorious online gossip column known for its vicious high society takedowns. The headline was a masterpiece of sensationalist cruelty. "The mad heiress of Starrywood, billionaire astronomer in lonely fortress as family fears for her sanity." The article was a disgusting tapestry of half-truths and outright lies, clearly fed to the journalist by a concerned family source, a source I knew could only be Clarence or Simone. It painted a portrait of me as a tragic reclusive figure, a modern-day Miss Havisham who had locked herself away in a remote mansion after being jilted by her family 20 years ago. My life's work, my passion for astrophysics, was twisted into a bizarre obsessive delusion. I was a woman who squandered her family's fortune on a delusional fantasy of talking to the stars. My quiet, private nature was described as a symptom of severe agoraphobia and social anxiety. The article was accompanied by long lens, grainy photographs of my home, making it look less like a sanctuary and more like a sinister Gothic fortress. It even included a quote from a psychologist who, without ever having met me, speculated that my behavior was consistent with a late-in-life psychotic break. The story was designed to do one thing: to strip me of my dignity, to erase the brilliant, accomplished scientist and replace her with a caricature of a crazy, lonely old woman. It was an attempt to preemptively discredit me, to ensure that when the real fight began, the public would already be on their side. The article spread like wildfire through the digital world, picked up by other slightly more reputable outlets, who repeated the salacious details without bothering to fact-check them. My quiet, anonymous life was over. I was suddenly, unwillingly, a public figure, a character in a tawdry drama I had never wanted to be a part of. My first reaction was a profound sense of violation. My home, my sanctuary, had been invaded by the prying eyes of the world. My life's work had been mocked, my mental health publicly questioned. But as the initial shock wore off, it was replaced, once again, by that familiar cold resolve. They thought that by dragging me into the mud I would retreat, that I would be so shamed and so horrified by the public attention that I would give in to their demands just to make it all go away. They had, as always, underestimated me. This public attack was not just a smear, it was a tactical error. By making me a public figure, they had given me a platform, and I was about to use it. That evening I had a long strategic call with Nia and her legal team. We had been planning a quiet, defensive legal strategy, designed to dismantle their lawsuit with methodical behind-the-scenes precision. But this public attack changed the rules of engagement. "They've brought the fight into the open," Nia said, her voice tight with anger. "We can no longer afford to be quiet. We need to go on the offensive." I agreed. The time for silent, dignified defense was over. It was time to fight back, not just in the courtroom, but in the world. It was time to show the world who Dr. Rosalind Hayes really was. The quiet, reclusive scientist was about to make her public debut, and it would not be as a victim, but as a force to be reckoned with. The tabloid smear was not just a random act of cruelty, it was the carefully planned air support for their main assault. A week after the article was published, while the internet was still buzzing with speculation about the mad heiress, the final, most vicious attack came. Arthur, my head of security, met me in the library, his face grimmer than I had ever seen it. He handed me a thick envelope, delivered by another process server. This was not a lawsuit. This was something far more personal, far more insidious. It was a petition, filed in probate court, to have me declared mentally incompetent and to have a conservator appointed to manage my person and my estate. The proposed conservator, the man who would be given total, absolute control over my life, my finances and my freedom, was my brother Clarence Monroe. I read the document and, for the first time in this entire ugly affair, felt a genuine, visceral wave of fear. This was not about money anymore. This was about my life. This was an attempt to legally erase me, to turn me into a non-person, a ward of the very man who hated me most in the world. The petition was a work of profound, calculated evil. It was filled with sworn affidavits from Clarence and Simone, each one a masterpiece of twisted memory and malicious lies. My lifelong passion for astronomy, my dedication to my scientific work, was presented as evidence of a dangerous obsession, a delusion that had caused me to lose touch with reality. They claimed I suffered from extreme paranoia, citing the high-tech security system at my home, a system I had installed to protect my privacy from a world I had chosen to leave behind. My venture philanthropy, my secret decades-long project of funding world-changing technologies, was described as a pattern of erratic and reckless financial behavior. They listed some of my early, riskier investments, the ones that had failed, of course, as proof that I was squandering my family's money on a whim. My private nature, my choice to live a quiet life away from the glare of society, was twisted into a portrait of a woman suffering from severe agoraphobia and depression, a woman incapable of taking care of herself. Simone's affidavit was the most cruel. She recounted stories from our childhood, twisting moments of my youthful introversion and intellectual curiosity into early signs of mental instability. She wrote with a sickening false piety that she was doing this out of love, that she could no longer stand by and watch her brilliant sister fade into madness. It was a complete, systematic assassination of my character, my intellect and my sanity, all designed to convince a judge that I was a danger to myself, and that my vast fortune needed to be protected by my concerned, loving family. I finished reading and my hands were shaking. They had taken my life, my choices, my very personality, and turned them into a weapon against me. They were using my own mind as the justification for caging me. For a long, terrifying moment, I felt a wave of helpless, suffocating panic. The legal system was a world I did not know. How could I fight this? How could I prove the sanity of a life that was by its very nature extraordinary and unconventional? They were trying to put my very soul on trial. But then the fear receded, and the anger returned. An anger so pure and so powerful, that it burned away the last of my hesitation. They had come for my money. They had come for my reputation. And now they had come for my freedom. This was their final, fatal miscalculation. They had not just cornered an animal. They had cornered a queen. And a queen, when her kingdom is threatened, does not abdicate. She goes to war. The competency hearing was their chosen battlefield, and I would meet them there. But I would not meet them on their terms. The time for a quiet, defensive war was over. They had brought the fight into the public square, and I would answer them in kind. That night I convened an emergency video conference with Nia and the entire senior legal team of Helios Innovations. I laid out the situation, my voice calm and resolute, the tremor in my hands long gone. They are attempting to strip me of my legal rights, I said, my voice as cold and clear as the space between stars. This is no longer a financial dispute. This is an existential threat. Our response must be equally existential. For the next 2 hours we planned our counteroffensive. We would no longer be responding to their attacks. We would be launching our own. The first step was to turn their own weapon against them. They have filed a malicious, fraudulent and defamatory petition against me, I said to the lead litigator, a man whose shark-like reputation was well earned. I want to respond with a countersuit so massive, so overwhelming, that it will suck all the oxygen out of their case. I want to sue them for defamation, for malicious prosecution, for intentional infliction of emotional distress. I want you to calculate the damage to my personal and professional reputation, the potential damage to the reputation of Helios Innovations now that my name is being associated with this circus, and I want you to present them with a bill for damages that will make their blood run cold. The lawyer's eyes lit up with a predatory glee. Consider it done, Dr. Hayes, he said. We will make them regret the day they learned how to sign their own names. The second step was to seize control of the public narrative. They had painted me as a mad woman. It was time to show the world the truth. Nia, I said, turning my attention to my protégé, that new solar initiative, the one that's going to power the entire eastern seaboard, we were planning to announce it next quarter. I want you to move the announcement up. I want you to hold a major press conference as soon as possible, and I want you to be the keynote speaker. Nia understood immediately, and at that press conference she said, her voice a low, dangerous hum, I will go off script. Precisely, I confirmed. The third and final step was the most difficult for me, but I knew it was necessary. I had to step out of the shadows. I had to let the world see me, not as the caricature they had created, but as the woman I truly was. The legal team began to assemble a list of character witnesses for the competency hearing, a list that read like a who's who of the scientific and technological worlds. Nobel laureates I had anonymously funded, CEOs of revolutionary companies I had mentored, renowned academics I had collaborated with. These were the people who knew my mind, who understood my work. They would be my army. The Monroes thought they were fighting a lonely, isolated old woman. They had no idea they were about to face a global coalition of some of the most powerful and respected minds on the planet. The battle lines were drawn. They had chosen the ground, but I would be the one who chose the weapon. The press conference for the new Helios Innovations project, the Solstice Initiative as it was called, was a major media event. It was held in a vast sun-drenched auditorium in New York City, packed with hundreds of journalists, industry analysts and government officials. The air was buzzing with anticipation. Helios was at the zenith of its power, a green tech behemoth that was single-handedly revolutionizing the global energy market, and this announcement was expected to be their most ambitious yet. I was not there in person, of course. I watched via a secure private video feed from the quiet of my study, a ghost in the machine of my own creation. Nia Phillips took the stage to thunderous applause. She was a vision of modern power, dressed in a sharp minimalist suit, her presence commanding and charismatic. For the first 20 minutes she stuck to the script. She laid out the breathtaking scope of the Solstice Initiative, a multi-billion-dollar project to build a network of orbital solar power stations, that would beam clean, limitless energy down to earth. The scale of it was audacious, world-changing, and the room was captivated. Then, as she was nearing the end of her prepared remarks, she paused. She looked up from the teleprompter, her gaze sweeping across the sea of faces in the auditorium. A different, more personal, and far more intense expression settled on her face. "The Solstice Initiative," she began, her voice a little quieter now, drawing the entire room into a new, more intimate focus, "is a project built on a foundation of visionary thinking, of daring to believe in a better future, and that vision is not mine alone. For 20 years, Helios Innovations has been guided, nurtured and funded by a silent partner, a private benefactor whose intellect and integrity are the true bedrock upon which this entire company is built." The room was utterly silent. The journalists were leaning forward, their pens poised, sensing that the real story was about to begin. "This individual has always chosen to remain anonymous," Mia continued, her voice now ringing with a fierce protective passion. "Not out of shame, but out of a profound humility, a belief that the work should always be more important than the individual. But recently a vicious and cowardly attack has been launched against this person, an attack designed to smear her reputation and question her very sanity. You have read the lies in the tabloids, you have heard the whispers of the mad heiress. I am here today to tell you the truth." She took a deep breath, and then she delivered the blow. "The anonymous, visionary genius who founded and has chaired the board of this company since its inception is Dr. Rosalind Hayes." A collective gasp went through the auditorium. The name, which had been a piece of tabloid gossip just days before, was now connected to the most powerful and respected green tech company on the planet. The journalists were typing furiously, their faces a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. Mia wasn't finished. "Hayes is not a madwoman," she declared, her voice now a powerful, ringing indictment. "She is a celebrated astrophysicist, a brilliant scientist, whose understanding of the universe has allowed her to see the future in ways that smaller, more cynical minds cannot comprehend. The family that has publicly disowned her and now seeks to control her fortune is the same family whose industrial-age company is collapsing under the weight of its own obsolescence. This is not a story about a family's concern for a frail old woman. This is a story about a dying fossil fuel-guzzling dinosaur attempting to devour the very visionary who is building the future. And I am here to tell you, and to tell them, that we will not let that happen." She concluded the press conference not with a product demonstration, but with a declaration of war. The story was no longer about a crazy old woman. It was about a hidden titan of industry, a scientific visionary under siege by her greedy, failing relative. The public narrative had been completely, irrevocably and brilliantly rewritten. The competency hearing, which was supposed to have been a quiet, procedural affair in a sleepy probate court, had become a full-blown media circus. The courtroom was packed with journalists from every major news outlet, all drawn by the sensational story of the secret billionaire and her grasping, desperate family. The Monroes arrived looking like they were attending a funeral. Their faces were pale and drawn, the confident arrogance of their first visit my home, now replaced by a haunted, defensive glare. They had expected to be the heroes of this story, the concerned family saving their mad relative. Instead, thanks to Nia's press conference, they had been cast as the villains, a trio of greedy, grasping parasites, attempting a shameless money grab. The hearing began, and their case, which had looked so cruel and intimidating on paper, began to fall apart almost immediately under the harsh public lights of the courtroom. Their lawyer, a slick, overconfident man who was clearly out of his depth, called my sister, Simone, to the stand first. She recounted her carefully rehearsed stories, twisting my childhood introversion into a narrative of social deviance, my academic focus into an unnatural obsession. But under the polite, surgical cross-examination of the Helios litigator, her testimony crumbled. He forced her to admit that she had not actually seen or spoken to me in 20 years. He presented her with financial records, obtained through discovery, that showed her lavish, debt-ridden lifestyle, establishing a clear financial motive for her sudden concern for my well-being. By the time she stepped down, she was not a loving, worried sister. She was a desperate, proven liar. Clarence was even worse. He took the stand with a blustering, aggressive energy, his testimony a litany of insults and accusations. He called my life's work a childish fantasy, my home a gilded cage, my mind unmoored from reality. His performance was so filled with venom, so transparently driven by a lifetime of resentment and jealousy, that it backfired completely. He did not look like a concerned brother. He looked like a bully, a man furious that the sister he had always considered his intellectual inferior had so spectacularly surpassed him. The final devastating blow to their case, however, came when my lawyer called our first and only witness to the stand, Dr. Nia Phillips. She walked to the witness stand with the same calm, commanding presence she had displayed at the press conference. She spoke of our 20-year partnership, of my mentorship, of my brilliant, strategic mind. She presented the court with a detailed, audited history of my philanthropic investments, showing a pattern of not erratic behavior, but of visionary, high-risk, high-reward investments that had changed the world. She then read into the record statements from a half-dozen Nobel laureates and university presidents, all of whom attested to my brilliance, my stability, and my profound contributions to the field of science. The judge, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who had been watching the proceedings with an expression of growing disbelief, had finally heard enough. She cut the proceedings short. She looked down from her bench, her gaze settling on my brother and sister with a look of utter contempt. In my 20 years on this bench, she began, her voice a low, angry growl that silenced the entire courtroom, I have rarely seen a more transparently greedy and abusive petition brought before this court. You have not come here out of concern for your sister. You have come here with the despicable intention of using this court to perpetrate a financial crime. You have wasted this court's time. You have publicly defamed a distinguished member of the scientific community, and you have done so with a callous disregard for the truth that I find frankly abhorrent. She then turned her gaze to me, and for the first time her expression softened. Hayes, she said, her voice now filled with a quiet respect, I am so terribly sorry that your family has subjected you to this ordeal. And then, with a final decisive bang of her gavel, she delivered the verdict. This petition is dismissed, with extreme prejudice. It was over. The checkmate was public, it was absolute, and it was devastating. The epilogue to my family's war was written not with angry words but with the cold, dispassionate language of legal filings and financial statements. The dismissal of their competency petition was only the beginning of their ruin. My countersuit, which they had dismissed as a bluff, moved forward with the relentless, crushing efficiency of the Helios legal machine. Faced with a mountain of evidence and the prospect of a financially catastrophic judgment against them, the Monroes were forced to settle. The terms were not merciful. They were required to issue a full, public retraction of all their defamatory statements and to pay a settlement for damages so large that it ensured their financial and social ruin would be absolute and permanent. Monroe Manufacturing, already on the verge of collapse, was finally pushed into bankruptcy. In a final fitting act of irony, its assets were acquired in a bankruptcy auction by a subsidiary of Helios Innovations for pennies on the dollar. Nia, in a move of quiet poetic justice, ordered the most polluting of their old factories to be shut down and the land to be remediated and converted into a public park and a site for a new clean energy research facility. The Monroe name, once a symbol of industrial power, was now a footnote in the story of its own demise. I never saw my brother or my sister again. Their desperate, angry phone calls and letters went unanswered, returned to sender by my security team. They had chosen to become ghosts in my life 20 years ago, and I was simply honoring their decision. My victory did not bring me joy, but it did bring me a profound and deeply welcome sense of peace. The world, which had so violently intruded upon my quiet sanctuary, slowly receded. The journalists and the gawkers eventually moved on to their next scandal, and my life returned to its familiar quiet rhythm. The final scene of this long, painful drama took place not in a courtroom or a boardroom, but where it had all begun, in the quiet, star-dusted darkness of my observatory. I was alone, as I so often was, but I was not lonely. I was at the eyepiece of my main telescope, my gaze fixed on the faint, beautiful light of the Andromeda Galaxy, a river of 100 billion stars 2.5 million light-years away. My secure phone buzzed softly on the desk beside me. It was Nia. "It's done," she said, her voice warm and final. "The last of the legal filings were signed today. They won't ever bother you again." "Thank you, Nia," I said, my voice filled with a gratitude that went far beyond legal victories. "Thank you for everything." "You don't have to thank me, Rosalind," she replied softly. "You built the shield that protected you. I just held it up." We said our goodbyes and I ended the call. I was left once again in the profound, beautiful silence of my sanctuary, alone with the vast, orderly, and infinite universe. I returned my gaze to the heavens, to the silent, cosmic dance of distant galaxies, and I felt a sense of peace so deep, so absolute, that it was a kind of victory in itself. I had protected the universe I had built for myself, and it was, and always would be, more than enough. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.